Hello and welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. I'm your host, Andrew Moses. I'm joined today by Jeff Bell, CEO of LegalShield. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Andrew, it's an absolute pleasure.
Jeff, it's a pleasure to have you here. There are so many exciting things going on at LegalShield. You joined in 2014 as CEO. For my viewers and listeners, why don't you, just from your own perspective, share a little bit about the background of LegalShield and what you do?
Yeah, the easiest way to think about LegalShield is we're a lot like Spotify. Spotify doesn't actually make the music, and LegalShield doesn't practice the law. Instead, both of us acquire members that then we service and retain. So instead of providing access to unlimited music, we provide access to unlimited legal services. So that's what LegalShield's all about. We have a mobile app that puts a law firm in the palm of your hand. You push one button, it's calling your law firm in your state or province of Canada. You're going to be able to speak to that law firm on unlimited issues. You can get a will done, have a speeding ticket taken care of, have a letter written on your behalf, have a contract reviewed. And it's so disruptive that most people think it like blows their mind. And that's really the biggest challenge we have is we're a disruptor, not a destroyer. We're trying to get people to think differently about how they can live free and worry less with a law firm always on their side.
It's fascinating, and as I understand it, I mean, tremendous growth since you joined the company in 2014, and as the leader, just under 2 million members now. It's a pretty staggering growth story.
Well, no, that's very kind of you to say. We feel like we haven't even scratched the scratch. I mean, there are 155 million households that I honestly can say everyone should have LegalShield. Bill Gates, my former employer, should have LegalShield. And you say, well, why? Why would you pay $1,250 an hour, which is the most expensive lawyer right now, or maybe even higher in some places? But why would you have that person, handle a neighborly dispute, or as I said, some other document review? So many times people deny themselves the right that was given to them by living under the law because they don't think they can afford it. Or worse yet, they think that all lawyers are unresponsive, inaccessible, and unaccountable. And we really address that. All of our lawyers receive feedback from our members every time they're used. And anyway, we're just trying to change the whole approach to anytime you feel like you've been bullied. A lot of times people walk away. If anytime you feel like, the power is being used rather than justice in your interactions, that's why we exist. So we're very much a mission-based company. It's what gets me up out of bed every day is just feeling like, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get everybody to participate in this community and really make their lives better?
It's so exciting, and I know you guys are so mission driven and mission oriented. Jeff, we call this show Everybody Pulls the Tarp, and it's all based on a platform of enthusiasm that I and so many others have around teamwork and great work ethic and collaboration. And what a lot of people always ask me, why do you call the show Everybody Pulls the Tarp? And I talk about the first internship I had when I was in college, and I worked in minor league baseball, and I thought I was going to be doing front office work every day and learning the business of sports. And the CEO, brings me and a few other interns into a conference room and says, guys, pack a pair of old clothes, put them in the locker, and you're going to help the grounds crew pull the tarp on and off the field. And there's, I could go on for an hour about these stories, but the premise was the field is the same size, the dirt's the same, the grass is the same in the big leagues as it is in the minor leagues. But the big league club has, a 20 to 25 person grounds crew, and there's a much smaller staff in the minor leagues. And it had such an impact on me, that experience, kind of just rolling up the sleeves, doing whatever it took to help the team, help the grounds crew. Thinking about your career, I think it was when you were 8, 9 years old, or whenever you had your first job, you were a paperboy. Whenever they would let you have a paper route for the Dayton Daily News. You worked 7 days a week. Talk about that for a minute. I don't know. Did it have the impact on you that the tarp pulling had on me, or what do you think about when you think back on that? That's probably your first job, I would say, right? If you're that young.
It was. Yeah. Well, actually, right before that, I was selling seeds like flowers and vegetable garden seeds door to door. I think that my father was an entrepreneur. He started his own public relations business and then went on to manage trade associations and professional societies with a larger company. And so maybe it was just a little bit his own example. I will tell you that my father told me perhaps the greatest lesson that I've learned in life. There are only two things that you can control in life, he told me: your attitude and your effort. And he said your attitude should always be positive and your effort should always be exemplary. And I've tried to live that way. And so when I had the chance to be a paper boy, a chance to not only deliver the papers, but to interact with our neighbors and, to try, that's how I picked up, for instance, some lawn mowing jobs in the summertime or shoveling driveways. And for me, it was just part of being in the community. But I want you to know also, I love Everybody Pulls the Tarp. I love your story. And it is absolutely aligned with my own life experience. A lot of times you talk about intern, and so many times I have three sons that are now full grown men, but every time, they had an internship or they had a summer job, inevitably, they were asked to do things that, they were like, well, why am I doing it? Feeling like suddenly, well, you are at the base of an organization, but it gave me the opportunity to remind them some of the greatest experiences of my own life were not by feeling put upon to do those things, but actually liberated, to be able to really roll up the sleeves and make a contribution and then to learn from it. I'll give you an example. My first job, which really started, as an internship, and then it became a fully paid position, they were like, hey, you're the new guy. You need to, figure out how to make this Texas Instruments computer system work. Okay. You just got out of college. You have to know something about this stuff. This was in 1984. Okay. And I was like, okay, and I jumped in, and believe it or not, the Texas Instruments system had a single CPU operating system, and everyone had dummy terminals. They literally had a keyboard and a monitor. And so look how far we've come, all the way back around again, almost to that same idea. But that's what started my lifelong engagement with hardware and software. I literally have grown up as a netizen, but it was because I was an intern given that same kind of TARP assignment that changed my life forever.
Right. I always look at, every task, everything that's put in front of you is what's the opportunity here to learn? What's the opportunity to contribute? I love the lesson. I wrote it down. The comments you made about your father sharing the attitude and the effort are the two things you can control, right? I say a lot of times, I'm probably never the most talented, the most athletic. I'm never, the smartest guy in a room, but I'm never going to be in a room where someone's going to outwork me. And I'm never going to be in a room where, I let my attitude get the best of me, right? I'm going to bring, the right attitude, the positivity, and try and contribute. It's such a, it's so cool to see that instilled in you at such an early age. Now, I also understand you achieved attained the very rare status of Eagle Scout.
Yes, sir.
Talk about that experience, and do you draw on any of those experiences today?
Absolutely. So my father was an Eagle Scout, and so to the degree that I again had an example that I could look up to, and I want to say for the record that many times, the blessing that I received more than any other is that my parents were high school sweethearts. They went to the same university. They loved each other. They were committed to each other. What an incredible blessing, truly, because that cascades, a loving relationship cascades in bountiful ways to others. A lot of people don't have that. And it's no fault of their own that they may not have the same type of circumstances that I was blessed with. But I will tell you, I never take it for granted. And even though I lost my father in a tragic accident when I was 21 years of age in college, the foundation was always there that I could look back on some of these examples, including Eagle Scout. But it was interesting. He was involved, but not really too involved in scouting. He just encouraged me that it was a good experience. I think that scouting gave me, you had to get 31 merit badges, and you had to get them in different categories. So there was both a diversity and a depth of learning that I thought the structure was quite attractive. I love the outdoors. I have to give a lot of that, to scouting because, when you take your first camp out and it rains like crazy, or you take a hike and, it's windy and snowy, and, you get to see not just the beauty, but also some of the challenges that are presented. You have a greater appreciation for the world around you. And I always loved, even when later in life I worked at Jeep, which was very strong on leave no trace. You get the same thing in scouting, that you need to be sensitive to your environment. You have to be thankful, for what nature has given us, and you have to protect it wherever you can. So I would say that scouting was great for me. Structure, achievement oriented, and again, recognition when you accomplish something, they'd give you a level up, and I always valued that.
Right. And I'm curious. I mean, you talked about the role of your parents and being in a loving home and having that support system. One of the things I'm always curious about is work ethic. Is work ethic something that you think people are born with, or something that people develop? Now, obviously, you talked about there's a nurture piece to any of it. But what are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting that you say that. I do think that, I probably, most people would consider me to be an achievement oriented personality. I can tell you that my mother, was pretty unhappy with my level of effort in school. She was a teacher herself, and she didn't think that I tried as hard as I should, that, I got good enough grades, maybe because I was brighter, than the average bear. But, I will tell you that it was in sports that you really come to understand a point that you raised as well. I was not the biggest, person. I was not the fastest. I was not the strongest. And I played football from the third grade until I graduated from college. And it was in that environment that I recognized that if you didn't give everything, every moment, if you didn't give everything, then you could only rely upon whatever physical attributes you'd been given by nature. And so I think that probably in sports, again, I played baseball, I wrestled, but for me it was more football because, number one, the teams were large, right? I mean, we had 68 people on the varsity team, right? And the complexities and the relationships and the fact that the offense many times would have antagonisms with the defense, and it was like this beautiful, system. Like, it was like a representation of life, and it was there that I found that it was the work, that getting by was meaningless. I was on a winning team in high school. We were 28-2 my 3 years of varsity after my freshman experience on the freshman team. And our two losses were to the two state champions in Ohio, to Cincinnati Princeton and to Cincinnati Moeller. And it was one of those things that, even though I was winning, I was in my senior year, I found in my very heart of hearts, I was going through too much of the motions, and I wasn't giving everything that I could. And that's when I decided that I wanted to play in college. And so that was what really triggered me, is that I knew I could give more effort.
That's interesting. So so you knew that you could give more effort. Then how did you build a plan to get yourself ready for college and the football side of it too?
Yeah, so I ended up going to Kenyon College, a Division III school that was at the time part of the Ohio Athletic Conference. And my freshman year, I started at defensive end linebacker, a position I'd never played before. And my preparation, quite frankly, was just as you would expect. I ended up running about a 6-minute mile as a defensive player. I could run I could run a 4.8 40-yard dash. By the time I got there, I could bench press around 425 pounds. So I just got myself into the best shape that I'd ever been in. What I knew was possible after playing at a high school program, Centerville High School in south of Dayton, Ohio. And that year we were 3-6. And I was frustrated, but the thing that made me feel great was that there were 6 other freshmen that started that year. And our following year, we ended up being 5-4. And again, we were 5-3-1 as a junior, and then 7-2. And so to be part of a program that got better in my college time, playing against the University of Dayton that had just gone from D1 to D3, playing against Baldwin Wallace. These were good schools, Allegheny. We did it as a team. And that was the thing, the sacrifice of oneself for the team's good and giving everything you've got, leaving it on the field. It's a psychological game. You see it even in the pros. Somebody makes a play like recently, DK Metcalf here of our hometown heroes, the Seattle Seahawks, where we live. You run somebody down from behind. It changed the motivation of the game for the team. I mean, you see that kind of effort and it makes a difference.
And sometimes those things aren't the things that show up in the stat sheet, but they make all the difference. I can tell, Jeff, talking about your athletic career brings so much joy to you. What about as a CEO? Do you obviously you're leading a high performing team, and a lot of CEOs say, it's not that different from experiences in sport in the past. Talk about that for a minute, and then I want to get into a little bit of your time at Microsoft and your time at Daimler Chrysler, and then we'll of course we'll continue on LegalShield. But talk about your experience in sport and how that influences you as a leader.
Yeah, I would say that it's completely intertwined. This is my first opportunity to serve as a CEO to a company. Before that, I'd had some general management positions, either as the managing director at Ford Spain or running organizations at Chrysler like Jeep or the Chrysler brands. Fundamentally, you do look to what would have been a head coach or somebody that was overseeing the team, but you also get the sense in sports of the criticality of the culture amongst the players, and even recently. I saw Urban Meyer speak about, on the topic of the University of Michigan, which seems probably terribly jaded, but he was trying to say what really was going on is that, you've got to have trust. There has to be trust between the leader and the members of the team. There has to be trust between the members of the team, that there has to be a clear alignment between expectations and effort. Again, if you want to win a championship, then you've got to give the effort to be a champion. And if we're not working hard enough, you got to call out that we're not working hard enough to be a champion. And so I really felt like some of his words were extremely appropriate for business, because exactly the same thing's true. The one thing about business and sports have absolutely in common: results. You either win or you do not win over time. And in business, you either succeed or you do not succeed. And it's measured exactly in the same way. There's a scoreboard. And that's that. It's different, I would argue, than perhaps other areas of our society where things are not as accountable and are not as measured and transparent.
That's an interesting connection that you make there, Jeff. And I mean, you've been, I want to go back a little bit before your LegalShield days. I'm looking at the guy who, essentially is responsible for the 4-door Jeep Wrangler. So my listeners and viewers, they surely are going to want to know about that a little bit. But before LegalShield, obviously senior roles at Microsoft, VP of global marketing over the Xbox product. Obviously very, very exciting. 5 years at Daimler Chrysler, where, as I just alluded to, you are credited with the development and launch of the Chrysler 300 and the Jeep 4-door, which is certainly interesting. 2 prestigious Cannes Lions awards. Brilliant marketing mind, Jeff. So kudos for all that. When you think about the CEO role that you sit in now and your history in kind of marketing and creative and product development, if you will, how does that shape you as a leader? Because at the end of the day, like you said, right? I mean, the numbers are going to tell the story as to whether or not a company is successful. But what's going to drive that success is, products that people want, stories that, consumers can resonate with. And you've got a lot of that experience and skill set.
Well, I probably will surprise you with my answer because I'm going to try and pull together what it's like to be, in many ways, a subservient team member to a team that you wish to succeed. And you should know, I call myself a servant CEO. So that does carry forward all the way, to the job that I have now. And then how yet can you be innovative? And I remember when I graduated from college and I went to Washington, D.C., and I started to work there. And I also I thought it would be interesting. I'd like to study a martial art. And for me, it ended up being Shorinji Kempo, which is not a very popular martial art, but it was one that I just happened to join because it was available to me. And that's where I learned something that I thought was fascinating. And that is that in martial arts, you simply repeat the correctly the different maneuvers that are taught to you by someone that you view as your master. That is the head of the dojo, that is the person that's instructing. And there is no innovation. And in fact, in all martial arts, the concept of anyone, including Bruce Lee, for example, creating a new move, it's simply foreign to the whole notion of martial arts. You master all of the different maneuvers within that particular sect, whether it's kung fu or it's karate or judo. And that was so enlightening to me because it said that there is this natural respect and service, to your craft, but there may be a point in your future where you begin to be more of an innovator. And that's, for me, being in corporate America, I was probably always a little bit out of place because I was looking to challenge the status quo. And that wasn't out of disrespect. It's because it's what I was asked to do. And so when I was, for instance, at Chrysler, at the time it was Daimler Chrysler, the company was losing a lot of money. And I was hired specifically to try and shake things up in the marketing as well as in the product development. And, to the question that you asked me, about Jeep, I just asked the question, why don't we have a four-door Wrangler? And people, it was like heresy. They were like, no, you don't get it. The Wrangler's always two doors. And I said, yeah, no, I know that, but why? Because, and that was about as far as the justification was. And I said, well, I think we should look at a four-door. I think people would like the same, by the way, without compromising the integrity of what a Wrangler can do off-road. And then when I learned that a longer wheelbase actually made off-roading more capable, that's all I needed. I'll tell you a funny story on the Chrysler 300. When I was in charge of marketing and advertising for Dodge, Chrysler, and Jeep, launched things like "That Thing Got a Hemi," sweet. I don't know if you remember that campaign. It's a long time gone, but I went out to the Pacifica studio, and Freeman Thomas was the head of that studio. And, he's like, hey, I hear that you're really thinking about branded entertainment, because I was trying to get our vehicles into movies and TV shows, right? And he said, I've got a model I want to show you, but right now it's like nobody's into it, right? He goes, because I think they're going to do the Green Hornet, and this car could be the car for this movie. And he showed me a model, and it was, the precursor for the 300. And I'm like, dude, I don't know about the movie, but that is unbelievable. That's jaw-dropping, right? That is so different. And I became an advocate. And I will tell you that it was a circuitous route to advocate, because the first thing that came out on that platform was the Dodge Magnum, which was a sports wagon, which Dieter Zetsche wanted to do because they were popular in Germany. But the second vehicle, thank God, was the 300. And so I would argue that, like John Maxwell says, good leaders ask great questions, politely, respectfully, appropriately. Sometimes you just have to ask the question, why not, as well as why, and try and press the envelope for greatness.
Yeah, and I think that when I think about pulling the tarp, right, and contributing, in unexpected ways, that there again is another example, right? I mean, you could have just kind of coiled back into your chair and try to, not disrupt, but you said, look, I'm going to make some unique contributions here. I'm going to go outside the bounds of thinking in this instance. But Jeff, with LegalShield, and we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but you guys are growing like wild. Now, 2020 has been a year like no other, and companies everywhere are pulling the tarp in new ways due to the pandemic and what have you. How are you guys navigating 2020?
Well, it's gone very well for us. We're presently on path to protect and empower 15% more people than we did last year. And in the face of a pandemic, we're proud of that. One of the areas where we do protect people is in employee benefits. That's been particularly hard hit because at one point 40 million people were unemployed and businesses are still shuttered. But in every other part of our business where we are, direct to consumer and presenting directly as a sales opportunity, a membership, that has gone really, really well for us. Partly because, and again, there are two sides to the experience. One, we have LegalShield, we have ID Shield, which is privacy and identity theft protection. When people suddenly have a false unemployment claim made on their behalf, they need protection. If somebody is trying to get scammed out of their stimulus check, they need protection. Equally, on the legal side, as people did get furloughed, laid off, let go, there are employment law issues that they're trying to wrestle with, evictions and foreclosures. So there was a lot of need for what we were doing to protect people. I will just go back, though, the real answer for us, where really we help to make life better for everybody, is an understanding that it's about empowerment. That, yes, you should talk to a lawyer if you get a speeding ticket. 42 million people last year got a speeding ticket. Not very many talked to a lawyer because they didn't think it was affordable. Or, when you sign a lease or you get a house mortgage, you should have that document reviewed. So, we just have been able to, A, use technology to reach more people, and B, really satisfy people with the service in these difficult times. And we just hope that word of mouth, they continue to share the good news with others.
How are you managing your team and your fellow leaders and all the employees, right? It's a complicated time, right? Because people are working remotely, different areas of the country are doing different things. There's just been a lot of angst, and challenge in the world this year. How do you give comfort to your team and help folks navigate periods of doubt, uncertainty, things like that?
Well, I will tell you again, in my own life experience, having worked a lot with advertising agencies, whether it was at Ford or at Chrysler or at Microsoft, I made the observation that, those members of the team, really, people that were working on your advertising and marketing to promote things like Gears of War or, Guitar Hero or Rock Band, they loved your brand too. They wanted your business to succeed, but they didn't necessarily live next door to you as a neighbor, and they weren't in the office every day. And so it made me think, is it possible to allow talent to live where it wants to live, but then to serve equally well as a member of a team? And that was a question I had when I became the CEO at LegalShield, and I didn't know what the answer would be. I have a home in Kirkland, Washington. It is my primary residence, but I also spend usually 2 weeks a month in Ada, Oklahoma, which is a relatively remote, less known place than Seattle, greater Seattle, but I spent it there in our headquarters. But I knew that if I wanted a best-in-class chief technology officer or a best-in-class employee benefits president, divisional president, that I was going to need to find people where they lived. And if they wanted to move to Ada, which again is always an option, great. But actually, if they lived in Seattle or they lived in Detroit or they lived in Des Moines or they lived in New York, that's fantastic. We would need to use different technologies. We would come together once, twice a month, break bread, hold intensive meetings for 3 or 4 days, and then go back to where we choose, to live every day. But it was in that we first tried Skype, then we tried video, and then 4 years ago, we stumbled onto this little company, startup. It's called Zoom. And we said, hey, let's use this. It worked. We actually then shared it very broadly to our North American sales team of about 40,000 people. They started using it. I think Zoom probably might write up in their history. They may be like, then we got a great break with this company called LegalZoom that used this. I'm teasing, but we had been doing virtual meetings, my one-on-ones, meetings with the organization for really the last 4 years. And so when COVID hit, we were perhaps more prepared than 99% of the world, I would say. Certainly, that's probably a fair statement. We were already a cohesive, culturally integrated team that didn't all live in the same city, but still were committed to the same cause.
And how cool is that, right? I mean, the whole brand is around empowerment, as you said, and what you're really doing long before the pandemic would have forced you to. You've empowered all of your, the brightest and best talent to to do what they need to do, right? To be successful, live where they need to live, contribute how they need to contribute.
Yeah, I will tell you that, and you started with this in our own, conversation. Culture just matters a lot, and so, one of the great quotes from a good friend of mine, Keith Ferrazzi of Ferrazzi Greenlight, a great team builder and coach.
Never eat alone.
Yeah, never eat alone. He said,
Love that
just
word.
because it's purposeful doesn't mean it's inauthentic. So when you say, I want to have a cohesive remote culture, doesn't mean that when you create it, it's inauthentic because you wanted to. We spend a lot of time understanding ourselves and what motivates each of us because we're each different. We're snowflakes. We're different. And then understanding from that insight how best to work together, how to talk to each other, how to communicate with each other in order to make each of us in our best self when we work together to raise the entire team up. And we take that very seriously. We're constantly reading books. We just read Infinite Games by Simon Sinek. We do a lot of book club, if you will. We love Traction by Gino Wickman. Obviously Keith's book, as you mentioned. We're readers are learners, right? And leaders are learners. And so we believe in that, and it's worked really well for us.
So last question, then I'll let you go, Jeff. Besides reading and learning, obviously you just touched on it there. What do you credit most for your success?
Well, I would say I also really have a deep faith. It's everyone's faith is their own, and my faith is one that tries to make a difference and to try and help as many people as I can. And to that end, that's a huge motivation for me. And when I look back on how so many people have invested in me and given me great gifts, I just feel like, if you're not giving, you're not living, as one of my great friends, Mike Turpin, says. And I believe that across the board in time and treasure. It's absolutely foundational to success and happiness.
Wow, Jeff, what a phenomenal place to end. But I know your story is many ways just beginning. Your story and LegalShield story. It has been such a pleasure, Jeff, to talk to you here on Everybody Pulls the Tarp. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us this week.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been a blessing. Thank you.